Leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here at third reading, Bill 23, an act to amend the Public Service Labour Relations Act. Really, Mr. Speaker, this bill doesn't address any of the actual problems that exist in the act as they are today. It strikes me as interesting that can you imagine a major employer in the private sector with a unionized workforce being able to set the rules of labor relations with their employees? There would be a hue and cry that is just unjust. But yet here, Mr. Speaker, of course it's the Legislative Assembly that's setting the rules technically, which should provide sufficient separation between the employer as manifested by the executive branch, the Premier and Cabinet, the employer, and the Legislative Assembly. But as we know, Mr. Speaker, the members on the government benches vote in unison all the time, so the separation really isn't there. So in a sense, the employer of these public employees in this sector are setting the rules. And so given that, Mr. Speaker, this bill needs to be, and any changes to the Public Service Labour Relations Act need to be done very carefully, not to upset the balance that exists in labour relations between employer and employees, Mr. Speaker, and this is exactly what this bill does. In speaking and hearing from folks within the labour movement, you know, what I'm hearing are things like, this is going to lead to more strikes if it passes. Lead to more strikes. Not a good thing. Strikes that didn't need to have happened. It's going to mean that while binding arbitration isn't used very often, it'll never get used because of the changes that are contained in this bill. And it will mean, Mr. Speaker, likely that government will use lockouts as a tool more regularly. So this doesn't advance labour relations, Mr. Speaker. This sends them backwards. And that's the problem, and that's why I'm standing here, up on this bill at third reading to say this doesn't actually address the problems that exist. You know, it doesn't address the issue of, properly address the issue, actually makes it worse, of essential workers by changing the deadline by which government can determine what number of workers are essential in what areas. So on the labour side, no one really knows what's happening until the very last minute after they've gone through a conciliation process. So, and then the bill doesn't put in place a process to ensure that if there are shortages of essential workers during a strike, say, that this process to ensure that the employer and the union get together to bring in those who are on strike, who are unionized, to replace, to fill the gaps, to ensure that the essential worker numbers are satisfied. So, you know, in New Brunswick, we're the only province in Canada as well, Mr. Speaker, where the Labour Board itself isn't empowered to handle disputes between employees and their bargaining agents, which is an odd thing. So the bill, or the Act, the Public Service Labour Relations Act, could use, actually, a comprehensive review with full engagement by all the parties involved, with expert input. That would be something that this House could do and make a real contribution to have a committee, hold hearings on what needs to happen in the Public Service Labour Relations Act. So that's what we should be doing. Instead, we've got this bill before us, Mr. Speaker, which is unacceptable. As one Labour official said, it's a mess. It's a mess, and I think that characterizes it well. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to bring forward an amendment seconded by the member for Kent North, that the motion for third reading be amended by deleting all the words after the word "that" and substituting the following: the House declined to give third reading to Bill number 23, an act to amend the Public Service Relations Act because this legislation will increase the number of strikes, it will increase the number of lockouts, and it will permit scab labor.
I think totally that's going to pass. I think that